Hello, hello, it's Dr. Carin here. How are you doing today? The theme for this month is detox, and we will be continuing that theme today. We really kicked off the theme for this month by actually doing a detox. I think last time I was on a couple weeks ago, I had just started day one of the detox, and we just finished that last week. So what we did was myself, Dr. Vanessa, 15 other people, we actually did a 10-day metabolic detox. This is where we guided the participants step by step in this anti-inflammatory eating, and we did medical foods to support the body's natural detox systems. And I had the absolute honor of being able to work with the participants as they took on this challenge and worked together in this super supportive community atmosphere. And in just 10 days, I got to hear about just awesome success stories of clear skin, weight loss, clarity of thinking, more energy, less pain. But I think what was coolest to hear about was just in 10 days, all of the participants felt more confident about being able to implement healthy detox habits into their daily lives moving forward, meaning that even beyond the 10 days, they're going to be detoxing better for weeks or even months. So that was just so much fun, and I was thrilled to be able to watch and monitor and observe these changes essentially being ignited over those 10 days. And I'm so excited to hear about how they do for the next few weeks and months ahead. If doing a metabolic detox program in a group like this sounds interesting to you, just let us know, leave me a comment so I can let you know when we set a date for our next program. This will likely be maybe in the winter around January or so. So just drop me a comment and let me know, or email us at the clinic and we will let you know as soon as we set a date for the next one. So that was a lot of fun. So we wanted to just continue that conversation about detox today. And I really wanted to actually do put a spotlight on gallbladder, because it's not something that we talk about very often, but a large part of the medical foods and the eating recommendations around detox are to support the liver and the gallbladder, the liver and the quality of bile that the liver is making, and the gallbladder function in allowing that bile to flow. So I wanted to just do a little bit of a deep dive on why I love the gallbladder so much, and why, of course, Dr. Neetu and I love bitters and talking about bitters. So that will play into this conversation as well. So I want to do a deep dive on the gallbladder today. So we will be talking about 3 ways the gallbladder issues can be making you feel bloated, tired, and toxic. So if you're joining us right now, give me a hello, give me a thumbs up so I can see who's there. Hi, Sohani, so nice to see you today. I hope you're doing well. Just let me know who else is on. And of course, at any time, as usual, leave me a question or comment anytime during the live. Okay, so let's dive into it. I think one of the things that I really wanted to talk about with the gallbladder is just what the functions are, because we don't really talk about how our gallbladder is feeling today, things like that. So I wanted to give you a few questions to help you I understand whether gallbladder function might be suboptimal for you. So now, of course, people who have had gallbladder attacks and then had to have treatment on the gallbladder, they certainly are one of the few people who know that there's some issues with the gallbladder. But for everybody else, I wanted to give you some hints and indicators so we can be proactive about gallbladder issues, because they're actually pretty common in terms of being the brunt of some of our modern lifestyle changes. So hi Diane, nice to see you too. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining me in this conversation. I absolutely love talking about the gallbladder. So when we all decided that we're going to be talking about detox this month, I could not talk about the gallbladder. I know that you probably have heard us talking about, and me as well, talking about liver a lot. And of course, the gallbladder is related to the liver. But I wanted to just give a bit more of a highlight on why it's so incredibly important beyond just working together with the liver. So I hope I can give you some of that information. So let me start off with just a few questions to help to identify whether gallbladder issues might be an issue for you. So for people who have had gallbladder attacks, you know this part of it. So you can sometimes actually have pain in the gallbladder or the ducts around the gallbladder, and that pain could be felt in the what we call the right upper quadrant. So that's in the right lower rib cage area is a typical area for gallbladder pain, and that pain can actually go to the back as well. So right lower rib cage in the back, and it can even radiate up towards the between your shoulder blades and even the right shoulder blade. So sometimes it's felt in the front, sometimes it's felt in the back, and sometimes it's all of those places all at once. So they can be pain, and that's typically if there's a gallbladder attack or little twinges, you can feel that. Now, even more common when it comes to chronic suboptimal gallbladder function is indigestion. And this could be indigestion after eating typically, and this could be 30-45 minutes after you've been eating. It could be a bitter taste in the mouth, like an acid reflux or a heartburn type of indigestion. Even some people actually feel nauseous as well. And again, it could be after eating. You can have also bowel changes, so the stools being more floating or greasy stools. And what I mean by greasy is you might actually see sort of like a smearing on the toilet bowl on a regular basis. And the changes in your stools could be both constipation or diarrhea, could actually flip-flop back and forth. And you can also see changes in the color of your stool. The color of your stool is an indication of gallbladder and bile flow changes. So you might see it going from like a really light chalky color to a very green color, a yellow, and even a dark brown. So all of those changes can tell us a little bit about bile flow. You can also have whole body symptoms like just fatigue or weak immune system. And what's the connection with the gallbladder and the immune system or energy? The big thing here is that amongst many other things, the bile functions to help us break down and absorb fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A and D and E. So if the bile flow isn't working properly, we can actually end up getting nutrient deficiencies that can lead to low immune system. And this is so critically important, especially as we approach the fall season. We want to just make sure that our nutrients are supporting our immune system as strong as possible. Other things that we can see, and this is pretty common, is just high cholesterol. Cholesterol leaves our body via the bile and then out through our bowel movements. And so if there's any kind of bile obstruction or slowing down of the flow, we can end up having higher cholesterol over time as well. You can also see toxicity issues. And what I mean by that is these are symptoms where essentially toxins are building up in the body. And so you can be more sensitive to a little bit of chemicals. For example, if you're walking through the perfume aisle or you're walking through the cleaning products aisle and you get a headache, or you actually feel tired immediately, that could be a chemical sensitivity, because it's just like a toxicity overload, because your bucket is already super full of toxins. You add a little bit more and you can feel those symptoms. So you can have that kind of thing if there's gallbladder issues there as well. You can have slowing down of the thyroid. You can have actually a fibromyalgia type of pain. You can be more prone to headaches or migraines as well. And then skin issues, that tendency to have itchy skin that kind of comes and goes, or skin rashes or even yellowing of the skin as well. And then the last one I'll mention is really resistant to weight loss, doing everything and the weight doesn't budge. That could be a little bit of a clue as well, that there's something going on with the gallbladder. I kind of call it the kink in the hose, because you can be doing so many other things, but if that part is blocked, you're preventing all of that good stuff from actually taking place. So all of the detoxification that the liver is doing, for example, that last step where the bile flows, if that's not happening, we're not going to have the benefits of liver detoxification. So it can be a really important key in the detoxification pathway. So those are some little clues about what your gallbladder is doing and whether it's not quite optimized to 100%. All right, and let me know if you have any questions about that, or if you have experienced any of those types of issues in the past or now. Now, I'm sort of flip-flopping between using the word gallbladder and using the word bile. So let me just clarify what I mean by that. The gallbladder is the little sac that's, again, in the same place, that right lower rib cage. It's tucked underneath the liver. So it's by ductwork, it can actually go into, from the ducts, from the liver, goes into the gallbladder. So it's this little sac. And then the bile itself is the fluid that the liver makes, and then it's collected in that sac and it's held there. It's concentrated in there, the water is absorbed, and then it's held there until it's needed. And so what happens there is the bile is made in the liver, and then it's concentrated and held in the gallbladder sac. So hopefully that makes sense with the differences between those two. We have a question about weight. You eat so much but no weight gain. Oh, interesting. So yes, it can be related to that as well, because there can be an issue with just nutritional, not being able to actually break down your food and not being able to fully absorb those foods, right? So this could be, of course, this could be part of the fat digestion, which bile is very important for, but this could also be happening at the stomach level with a weak stomach acid. And most of the time, those are actually happening at the same time, weak stomach acid and low bile flow. So good question. Yeah, you can absolutely have essentially some indicators that you're nutrient deficient, even though you're eating lots of nutrients, but you're not absorbing them. Yeah, good question. So back to the sort of that physiology and anatomy of the gallbladder and bile, what happens with the bile in the gallbladder is the reason why it's held in this sac and it doesn't just kind of drip through all the time is the bile is important for many things, including digestion. So we were just talking about how bile is really important for fat digestion. What it does, the bile salts in the bile actually emulsifies the fats, basically mixing them up. Emulsify means like combining fat and water together, just like soap does. And it essentially breaks everything down so that you can actually absorb those vitamins in there. So what happens is that the gallbladder holds onto that bile until there's signals from the digestion that you've just eaten. And that signal could be coming from the strong stomach acid. It could be coming from the content of the diet. So there could be actual fats in the food that's triggering your, giving that signal to your gallbladder. When the gallbladder gets a signal, it contracts. It's actually a muscular organ and it contracts. When it contracts, just like a pump, it squeezes that bile out of the gallbladder and it goes into the upper part of the small intestine. And of course, that's meeting the food as it goes down from your stomach into the small intestine as well. And then it gets to mix with the food. It goes all down the small intestine with the food, trying to break down that fat. A lot of the bile through the small intestine actually gets absorbed. About 95% of it actually gets absorbed back into the bloodstream and recycled back into the liver. But a small part of it, about 5%, continues to go on to the colon, carrying cholesterol, toxins, or the products of toxins, and then it hopefully leaves the bowels completely from there, leaves the body. So that's how that works for digestion using bile. But another few things that I wanted to point out, because if you know about bile, you probably know about fat digestion. But bile does a lot more than fat digestion. One, we mentioned the toxins. Of course, it takes all of those byproducts that the liver transforms all of these toxins so that we can get it out of our body safely and efficiently, and those byproducts go into the bile. So that's one way that we're just getting it out. Another part is the bile actually helps to kill bad bugs in our gut. So it's a really important part of balancing gut flora. So it actually can kill things like bad bacteria in our gut. So really important part of balancing our microbiome. And then last part of that I wanted to point out is that bile is actually really important for balancing hormones. And this is not something that we often talk about, but it is really important for making sure that we're getting rid of course, excess estrogen. We talked about this last month when we were talking about hormones, but also the hormones that are involved with balancing blood sugar as well. The bile actually helps to stimulate the receptors that help in fat and carbohydrate metabolism. So here you can tell that there's going to be some effects here with weight as well as energy. So that's where the bile can play a part with energy and weight as well. So again, when it comes to gallbladder, that's the sac. The bile is the fluid that's in the gallbladder that's made by the liver. Every day, your liver makes about 1 liter of bile. That's a huge amount. It always blows my mind. It's like 4 cups of bile that your liver is making every day. And so it's a huge volume, and it does a lot of work for us. So hopefully I can give you some tips to give your bile a little bit of love today. Now, some of you know the gallbladder really well because maybe you've had an attack or maybe you've had to have your gallbladder removed. Now, what happens when your gallbladder is removed? Your liver is continuing to still make that bile, right? About 1 liter a day. Now, the bile is still being made and it's still going through those ducts, but there's just no sac for it to collect and be held. So that's where we can end up having some digestive issues. So the without the gallbladder there, the bile will essentially be sort of inconsistently being dripped into the small intestine without having a lot of clear signals. And not being able to concentrate that bile and not being able to be held there until it's needed. So you may be getting a little bit of bile into your intestine when you don't need it, when there's no food there, or you might not be getting enough when you do need it and you have more fats there that need to be broken down. I see probably the most common symptom that I see of this is diarrhea. And there are even if this is an issue for you, of course, there are ways that we can help to support digestion. I'll talk about this more later on. But you can sort of just see how important that gallbladder is in just playing a role in helping us to control that bile flow and when we need that bile there. All right, so let's get into the meat of it, which is, so what causes our gallbladder to have issues in the first place? Why is it that gallbladder issues are so common then? So I wanted to bring up 3 very common things that we see as a result of our modern lifestyle. And the very first one is estrogen dominance. I talked about estrogen dominance a lot actually last month because it's such a huge common problem in particularly women in hormone imbalances. So estrogen is something that unfortunately we live in a very estrogenic environment. What I mean by that is our environmental toxins, there's actually a lot that actually have actions like estrogen on our body. So this is for men and women. We can have these influences from these environmental toxins. And of course, on top of that, women have their endogenous production, so the amount of estrogen that we're making in our bodies. And then we can also have potentially estrogen in things like birth control pills that are adding to that estrogen load. So you can see there's multiple different things that can increase the amount of estrogen in the body. And what we talked about last month was estrogen actually being cleared and processed through the liver. It gets transformed in the liver so that it can be cleared out and the levels can be more balanced. And the byproducts of that through the liver detoxification goes into the bile. So as you can see how your estrogen levels can influence your bile quality that way. Generally, higher estrogen levels reduces the bile flow. That's what we're seeing, that connection. So high estrogen dominance, just as a summary for those of you who didn't get a chance to see the hormone imbalance videos, high estrogen levels or estrogen dominance means generally we're seeing heavier or longer periods or strong PMS symptoms. This is really very common in perimenopause, so in your 30s, 40s, 50s. And not coincidentally, gallstone risk is high during perimenopause as well. So there's that very strong association between estrogen and gallstone risk because of the reduced bile flow. What happens with reduced bile flow is that, remember, when your bile is in the gallbladder is concentrating that bile. And if it sits there too long, if there's reduced bile flow, if there isn't good signaling from your stomach, a strong stomach acid, or you're avoiding fats completely and you're not getting that signal for the gallbladder to contract really strongly, that bile flow can be reduced and you can get even more this like thicker bile. The sludgy bile is sometimes what it's called. So that we want to be looking at good bile flow and good bile quality, both of those things on a regular basis. So first one is estrogen dominance. You can look back on our hormone imbalance videos to find out more about what you can do with that. But definitely watching out for where you're getting estrogen in your life. So whether that's in your diet or whether that's household cleaning products that have estrogen-like compounds in there, trying to clean those up are really helpful. And then also doing things like a metabolic detox that helps your liver process those estrogens really well. Those are a few things you could do for estrogen dominance. So Hannah had a question about symptoms of gallbladder stones. Such a good question. Yeah, so you know what? You could have absolutely no symptoms and have gallbladder stones, so gallstones, in the gallbladder sitting there. You may have no idea that they're in there until maybe you get imaging done or something like that where you can actually see them. Now, when you have symptoms is usually if those stones move and they actually cause some sort of obstruction in the bile flow. So if the gallstones go into the common bile duct and they obstruct, then you can actually have acute obstruction type of symptoms. We call this like a gallbladder attack because that will create a lot of inflammation in that area. And that can cause the pain symptoms we talked about earlier. So the pain in this right lower rib cage area or that's radiating to the back. So with that, you oftentimes are indigestion type of symptoms at the same time, bloating, gas, diarrhea, nausea, all of these kinds of things. But that's only if the stones are causing this inflammation. A lot of times those stones could just be in there, sitting there quietly, and we have no idea, we don't have any strong symptoms. I hope that makes sense. That's why I wanted to talk about this, because I'd love to be able to give you some tips to look at more subtle symptoms into your digestion and into your skin health and those kinds of things to see if we can be proactive about improving our bile flow, because yeah, they can be kind of stealthy that way with the stones until there's an actual attack. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so besides the estrogen dominance, the second one that I want to talk about is inflammation. So what do I mean by inflammation? Inflammation meaning things like low or weak stomach acid causing inflammation, and that can actually cause it build up our gallbladder issues. So what we mentioned earlier, strong pH of the stomach, and what I mean by strong is low, so very, very strong acid, low pH of the stomach. When the food goes through with that strong stomach acid into the small intestine, that's a very strong signal that the gallbladder is going to get to contract, and that's going to allow good bile flow. But if you have weak stomach acid, which is very, very common, if you have weak stomach acid, we're going to get a weak signal to the gallbladder and a weak bile flow. And over time, indigestion and all of these things that can happen from that. Now, what are some other causes of weak digestion? Using, of course, antacids, that could be heartburn medications and things like that, which are designed to weaken the stomach acid, could over time, with longer periods, can exacerbate this issue as well, as because of that weaker stomach acid. Having H. pylori can also cause that weaker stomach acid. H. pylori can be tested. It's a breath test, generally speaking. It's a conventional test that you could sort of rule out to make sure you don't have. Less commonly tested for is candida or yeast. That can also cause this weak stomach acid or issues with bile quality, as well as bacterial overgrowth and even chronic parasites like Giardia living in the system and sort of being a hidden infection. That can cause issues with bile as well. And we were talking about before that bile actually helps to balance out the good and bad bacteria. So, which one comes first is a little bit hard to say sometimes, but without good bile flow, you're higher risk of having an imbalance in the gut flora too. So that's where some of the inflammation can come in. Now, increased age, also there's a higher risk of weaker stomach acid. Stress is a super common cause for weaker stomach acid too. And then food sensitivities. Now, food sensitivities really can cause indigestion of all kinds. And of course, anybody can have personal, very unique food sensitivities. But something I've just seen just in my clinical experience is that there seems to be certain foods that seem more commonly an issue if you have gallbladder issues or bile issues. So these are more like coffee, eggs, and pork. I think bacon, that kind of thing. So if you're suspecting you have gallbladder issues, those three foods might be something that you want to just test and see if those are issues for you. And of course, things like sugar and processed foods are very hard on the liver in general, so it will change the quality of a bile too. So those are things to look at. Oh, something that I wanted to mention too is because the keto diet is very popular right now, and as you know, keto diet generally, that's a very high fat diet. And of course, that high fat content in your diet will be a strong trigger for your gallbladder to contract. And so if you have had sort of sludgy, slow bile flow for a long time, and then you're suddenly going into doing a keto diet where there's lots of fat, even if it's healthy fat, there'll still be a strong signal to your gallbladder. You may get some inflammation from that because suddenly you're trying to force the sludgy bile to flow really strong. And so you might get some indigestion, bloating, that kind of thing when you're first starting out with a keto diet. So and this is a good reason to just make sure, number one, that your digestion is well supported before you're switching your diet, and also to make changes gradually so that you can monitor your diet and monitor your symptoms and support your diet in the way that you need it. Question here about, does eating spicy food work against the gallbladder? Good question. And it's not something that I've seen an issue with, actually. When it comes to the gallbladder function, it's often sour foods and bitter foods that have the biggest impact in terms of the flavors on bile flow. And I have not seen spicy foods being a big issue. Good question. From a Chinese point of view, spicy foods are considered very energetically very hot. So if you already have, if you have a large amount of that and there's lots of heat in the body, and for whatever reason your bile isn't flowing very well, could be because of low stomach acid or because of stress or not eating enough bitter foods, that the heat can actually accumulate in the body. Because the heat is generally supposed to come out of the body through the bile and into the bowel movements, and that's where it gets released. But if you've got already lots of heat in your body, the bile isn't flowing very well, and you're eating a lot of spicy foods, then you might have an issue with there's constipation, and then you're going to see more like headaches, flushed face, acne, red skin rashes, and all these other heat type of symptoms. So in that case, I can sort of see spicy food exacerbating an issue, but not directly with the gallbladder. I don't think that's an issue with that. So yeah, no issues there. All right, and then the last way that the gallbladder can reduce function is insulin. So high insulin can have a huge impact on your liver. So let me clarify when I say high insulin, because I think a lot of people know what blood sugar issues look like or what they are. You know, if you're ever pricked and tested your blood, you're testing likely the blood glucose. If you're diabetic, you're very familiar with what I'm talking about here. But even in a conventional lab test, we often get our fasting blood sugar tested. Insulin is a little bit different. Insulin is the hormone that's there to help us control our blood glucose levels. So insulin is what is triggered from our pancreas when we eat something that's got some carbohydrates or some proteins in it. And when insulin is secreted, our body knows, oh, okay, we've got to store the sugar, take it away from the blood and put it in storage so that our blood sugar stays relatively level. So it doesn't go up too high, basically. So insulin is all about storage of energy. That's the signal that it's telling our body to store energy. High insulin levels are incredibly common. And if you're very resistant to weight loss, or if you have some issues with your blood sugar going way high and way low, you might want to consider checking your insulin levels. It is possible to have blood sugars, you know, if you measured your blood sugar and fasting blood sugar, or even your A1C percentage, they could all look totally normal, but your insulin levels can still be high, and they can still be causing weight, to holding on to weight, essentially. Because if your insulin levels are always high, your body's always being told, store the weight, hold on to the weight. High insulin levels also lead to higher cholesterol levels, like high triglycerides, again, because it's all about storage of that energy. This can also lead to fatty liver, storage of energy in the liver. So checking that insulin can be really helpful, because high insulin can just change the quality of your bile and reduce that bile flow. So when you're checking insulin, this is something that you can get through Life Labs. But it's best to do either fasting insulin or an insulin tolerance test. So you're not just looking at blood sugar, you're actually measuring the insulin levels. You can also double check things that are on conventional tests, Life Lab tests, like liver enzymes too. Your practitioner can review your tests and just see if there's little hints about how your liver is doing. There are some indicators that are a little bit more of a hint on how your gallbladder is doing as well. So those can be helpful in just giving us a little bit of a heads up that something's going on with your gallbladder. So the three things we talked about was estrogen dominance, inflammation, particularly through the digestion and microbial balance, and then lastly, high insulin for gallbladder issues. All right, and then of course I'm always trying to make these about 20 minutes, and I'm already way over. So I want to just give a few tips on just how to improve bile flow. We mentioned the bitters before, and Dr. Anita has an amazing masterclass on this. So bitters to boost your liver. So check that out if you want to hear about why we love bitters so much, because it works really at the stomach acid, and all of our digestive enzymes, and including our bile and gallbladder. So this is a really great way of helping with our digestion, to use bitters, that's digestive bitters as a tincture, or bitter foods like ginger, arugula, dandelion greens, things like that. When it comes to food, I'll just add in a couple other things that are more gallbladder specific. Herbs like artichoke are really great for actually helping to increase the production and better quality of bile. So that's a really nice one if you suspect that there's some gallbladder issues, to have more artichoke just in your food, or to look for liver support that includes artichoke in there too. Cilantro is another good one. Cilantro actually helps with the bile flow, and likely this is why it's famous for being really good for detoxing heavy metals from the body. And so cilantro is like the classic detox herb, and we can just buy it at the grocery store. So definitely see if you can try to keep that in your regular diet, sprinkling it onto your foods right before you eat. Lemon and lime is often used for liver and gallbladder function as well. Anything else I want to talk about with the digestion and flow? I think we got most of those. We talked about estrogen and how to clean that up in your household products. And then insulin is just really understanding if this really is an issue for you. Do you have high insulin? If you understand what's going on with if you do have high insulin, then figuring out when your insulin is high is really important, so that you can use things like fiber strategically in your diet to help to reduce that blood sugar spike that triggers high insulin, for example. So that's something to really look at, particularly if you're really resistant to losing weight. I highly recommend looking at insulin for that. And then of course, all of these, we're talking about liver and how well it's able to do its job. And doing something like a metabolic detox, where you're doing an anti-inflammatory diet that avoids taking on more toxicity, but also helps to address a healthier insulin level and gives your liver the nutrients that it needs to actually process and do all of those biotransformations to neutralize our toxins. That can be so helpful for smoother flow of bile. And the metabolic detox that we do actually use a liver detox formula that has artichoke in it. So oftentimes we will notice better bile flow, and I know this because most people will report better bowel movements in a slightly a lighter brown color in their stools, which means a little bit of a faster transit time for the bowel movements. So less constipation, which is always a good thing with detoxification. Now, if you know that you have sludgy bile or thick bile, or if you know that you have stones, maybe you've been told that you've had stones, maybe you've had previous attacks with your stones, or maybe you've actually had your gallbladder removed, and you're wondering how to improve the quality of your bile moving forward, this is when I would highly recommend working with a practitioner, because we do want to improve the liver function and improve the bile quality, but we don't want to stimulate too much that causes indigestion or that causes pain because of the stones moving around too much. So there's a little bit of a balance there. So I highly recommend working with a practitioner. If you don't have a gallbladder, indigestion is super common, and digestive enzymes that have ox bile or bile salts can be really, really helpful. You might find that digestive bitters are helpful, or having hydrochloric acid in your digestive enzymes are helpful as well. So there are lots of options. Even if you don't have a gallbladder, remember that you're still making bile. Your body is still using that bile. It's still really, really important that quality of the bile is as good as it can be, because if you don't have that gallbladder sac, the bile is just going through the ducts of the liver and then going through the ducts into the small intestine, and you can actually still have gallstones even if you don't have a gallbladder anymore. So there's still risk of gallstones. So if you've had gallstones in the past, we want to make sure that there's no issue with acute attacks anymore, but beyond that, move upstream and figure out what are the things that have caused those gallstones in the first place. That's where it would be really helpful to work with a practitioner to figure out nutrients that can also improve the quality of the bile. So I hope that makes sense. When you have better bile flow, better bile quality, your digestion is better, skin is better, thyroid function is better, your immune system is stronger, you have more energy, you have better cholesterol. It just impacts so many different things. So I hope you can see why I'm kind of passionate about this, because it's such a common area of issues. But there's a lot that we can do about it as well. So that's why I always call it the kink in the hose. It's a really important thing to just put a microscope on once in a while, make sure that you're supporting it with your diet, and all of the detoxifications that you're doing on a regular basis. I hope that gives you a few tips and a little bit of understanding about your gallbladder and your bile. Do let me know if you have any other questions that come up about that, or any other topics that you want to hear about when it comes to gallbladder, liver, and detox. And if you want to find out more about our next metabolic detox group program, just leave me a comment or email us at the clinic, briohealth@yourbriohealth.com, and I'll make sure to contact you as soon as we have a date set for the next one. Thank you so much for joining with me today, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks. Bye.